Howdy, folks. Today we're talking landscape photography with one of the best right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, come on, 65%. Let's make it 50% at the very least. I mean, come on, people. You could really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show. It's just one click. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the land and cityscape photographer, author, the founder of Photohound, and Skylum Luminar expert. Give it up for Mathew Browne. Mathew, how's things?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm glad to speak to you finally. It's been a bit of an effort, hasn't it, putting our schedules together and actually getting a convenient time for us both to talk. But I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation today.
Absolutely. It's all about the long game. That's how I see it, you know?
Yes.
It's as easy as that. Mathew, I introduced you as a landscape and cityscape photographer, but really it's a part of the realm of travel photography. If you just give our listeners and viewers sort of a helicopter view on what it is that you do.
Okay, well, I mean, I always introduce myself primarily as a travel photographer. That's how I my start in photography. It was purely as a hobby. I travel is my other very expensive hobby, and I wanted to take images that really represented the locations that I was visiting, and this is how I got my start in photography. Picked up my first DSLR, and of course it becomes addictive, doesn't it? So with travel photography, you have to be a bit of a jack of all trades, as it were. So landscapes and cityscapes tend to be what I gravitate towards. Over the past couple of years, I've also veered into quite a bit of night photography, astrophotography as well. So yeah, I do a bit of everything, really. You know, I don't like to pigeonhole myself too much with what I do. But I guess, yes, if you were to headline it, I think landscapes, cityscapes, that's the majority of what I do.
You know, I always sort of categorize photographers into two categories. You know, those who shoot people and those who don't. Of course, it's very, I'm generalizing. What is it that attracts you to, let's say, shooting landscapes and cityscapes and things like that?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. It's, having recently moved into doing some commercial and wedding photography, I realized that the landscapes, the cityscapes, all that kind of stuff, it's nice because the landscapes don't talk back. And when you're shooting a landscape, perhaps you don't have somebody's well-meaning uncle who's a guest at a wedding tapping you on the shoulder and asking everything that you're doing. So I do like just being by myself and being able to take the shots that I want to take, and you have a bit of leeway to make mistakes as well, so it's you're always learning when you're a landscape photographer. I find that when you're doing people, portraits, weddings, this kind of stuff, there is obviously no room for maneuver in terms of learning on the job or sort of trial and error. You're there to do a job 9 times out of 10 and you have to sort of nail it every time. But landscapes, you have a bit of leeway. You can try new things and see what happens.
And of course, the landscape is always changing. This is the thing that I really admire about landscape photographers. Because in my little brain, I always think like, oh well, I don't live anywhere spectacular. I don't live in the Lofoten Islands. I don't live in Iceland. I don't live in in a place that's to me particularly exciting. But of course, the reality is, and this is something that I learned from David Williams, actually, is that the landscape around you is always changing. It's different in the winter compared to the summer. It's different in spring. It's different when it rains. It's different when it snows. Is that the sort of thing that attracts you to shooting landscapes?
Yeah, it's interesting you should raise this point. So I had a workshop a couple of days ago, and one of the locations that we visited together was a location called Paxton's Tower. It's a hilltop folly. It's an 18th century building and has a beautiful view of the Towey Valley here in Wales, and it's also about sort of 5-10 minutes from my home. So as you can imagine, it's the kind of place that I'm visiting often to practice my photography. And the gentleman who I was guiding asked me, how many times have you photographed here? And I really had to think, and back of a fag packet calculation, and it was it's easily in the hundreds. I'd been up there a couple of hundred times just trying to practice shooting the night sky and this kind of stuff. And you do raise a good point. These things do change from season to season and day to day. And I think part of the skill in landscape photography is one, identifying when the times are going to be conducive to good shots, because some are simply better than others. But I think the second component of it is you need to train yourself to go and find the ones that aren't perhaps your favorite. Like it's somewhat, I don't want to say easy necessarily, but from a photographer's perspective, you're always going to covet the sort of the golden hour, the blue hour. And in my case, if I'm doing astrophotography, perhaps when the Milky Way is visible, right? But how do you create compelling shots at different times of day? For example, this workshop guest, I'm visiting there with him in the middle of the day. The sun is overhead. The shadows are quite harsh. It's not the typical time that you as a landscape photographer would be visiting this location if it were up to you. So there is a skill involved in still coming away with interesting shots, even when the conditions aren't what you visualized before you set out. And in Wales, that can happen a lot. If you don't like rain, don't come shooting here. Right.
So yeah, I mean that's a stereotype. Over here in the UK, people from outside of the UK always think of the whole of Great Britain as being like one rainy mess. But even when you're in Britain, Wales is probably the one place where you think, well, it never stops raining over in Wales.
No. It's England's umbrella. When I was preparing my first book, it's called Wales in Photographs, and it's meant to represent a year of travel within Wales, and 126 images. And when I prepared the first batch of images and sent those to my publisher, the feedback I got was, these images are very nice, but they're all taken in quite pleasant weather, and we don't feel that that's entirely representative of what the climate in Wales is like. In other words, can you please go out and get some rainy day and cloudy shots, please? Because it's, you might end up with 100 pages of, very pretty and dry sunsets, which is not at all representative of what it's like to live here.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think I relate to it in, when it comes to portrait photography. It's often said that anybody can shoot a beautiful model. It's not difficult, right? It'll always look good. The hard thing is
careful what you say now.
Exactly. I was just self-correcting myself here. So I'm not going to say what I was actually going to say. But it's, let's put it this way. It's easy to shoot a professional model. Let's put it this way. And, it's much more difficult, to shoot people who are not used to being in front of the camera. When you do headshots, you have to deal with that every day, because the vast majority of people who come for a headshot session are just not used to being in front of the camera. In fact, they don't really actually want to be there in the first place,
right.
Especially with corporate headshots. Usually, middle management says, you have to, get some headshots done for the company website. GoPro
Right.
Kirsten. And that's basically that. And then I have to deal with somebody walking in going, oh, I hate having my photo taken. I'm like, oh, okay, here we go again.
I get this a lot shooting weddings. Is typically the groom that says that. I hate having my picture taken. Well, bad luck, my friend. It's your wedding day. I'm being paid to take a lot of pictures of you today, so you're gonna have to find a way to enjoy it quickly.
Especially,
I get the same feedback too. I must confess. And you get people who actually are photogenic, but then as soon as they know the camera's on them, they freeze, or they will adopt awkward looking poses that don't look quite right on camera. You know what I mean? And I find actually some of the best shots you get will be the candid ones when you're just mingling with the camera, and when they aren't expecting you and they're just being themselves and they're having a laugh and a drink and whatever. That is when sometimes you get the best shots of people who are like that. I don't know if that's, I guess you're not going to be shooting somebody having a drink when it's the corporate headshot, but the principle is the principle is the same, I would expect.
But that in that respect, I think that portrait photography and landscape photography are kind of similar and dissimilar at the same time, because with landscape photography, in my head, you're sort of more in control to an extent, because you can choose the location, you can choose the angle, you can choose the time of day, and you can decide whether you're going to take the shot or not. The landscape isn't going to run away. If it's not the right time or not the right, sky, then you can always come back. So in a sense, you're in control. Of course, you're not in control in the sense that you can't control the weather, and in that respect, you're out of control. But so in that respect, it's kind of similar in what I do in the studio, where I'm in control of the lighting. I can direct somebody in terms of posing and all the rest of it. And I guess that's why I like portrait photography. But when we had a conversation just before we came on live, I did tell you that I am a terrible landscape photographer, and that's absolutely true. It's not the first time I've said this on this podcast, by the way. This is true, and I think one of the and yet I say that with the caveat, I actually really appreciate great landscape photography. I love it, in fact, and I love cityscapes. I like street photography. I like landscape photography. But I find myself maybe being too impatient. Is patience one of your superpowers?
Oh, boy. Yeah, I've got a story in this regard, actually. My wife will appreciate me telling this one. So there was a shot I was desperate to get. We were visiting Kuala Lumpur, and there's a tourist attraction there, Batu Caves. And it's this Hindu temple. You have to climb about 100 stairs to get into it, and it's this lovely temple. And there's a cave with a sort of a gap, like a skylight above, where in the middle of the day the light will stream in, and there's birds flying around. It's super atmospheric. And I was trying to achieve in camera and single shot where possible all of these things coming together. So you've got the temple, you've got the rocks around you, you've got the light streaming in, which doesn't last all day, so you've got a window of about 2 hours for that to happen. And I wanted to get some birds flying through frame. You know what they say about working with children and animals. So very, I had to have a lot of patience to get the shot, and my wife, God bless her, was not terribly happy with me at the end, because I did wait there for a good hour, I would say, maybe 75 minutes, just in situ with the tripod set up, just waiting for the magic to happen. And I did get the shot. I was very pleased with it, to the point of being smug. But then I was packing my stuff up and was leaving the cave, and this other photographer took my place. So it's like a little alcove. There's only really room for one, maybe two photographers, but this chap was patient and waited for me to finish, and he set up his tripod to, I'm guessing, take a very similar sort of shot. But this guy was he was prepared a bit better than me because he reached into his back pocket and he had crumbs or bird seed or something and just threw this up in the air. And of course, the birds swoop in, click, click, click. He's got the shot in about 30 seconds flat, and probably better than my one that I waited an hour for. So you know what? Patience is important, but sometimes, you know, a little bit of savvy is better than patience. If you that's an extreme example, but you know, when it relates to landscape photography, when you're not waiting for something like birds or people or traffic to go through frame, you do have that luxury of being able to just wait for the conditions to happen. I think with experience, you learn to manage that better, or well, perhaps not manage it better, but manage your expectations, I should say, a little better. You know, if sunset is happening at 9 o'clock and you're turning up at 7:30, then you obviously should know that you're not going to get the best color in the sky for about a good hour, if it happens at all. So a lot of the work that I do before I even go out to take the shot is just doing my homework, you know, checking various apps for weather forecasting. There's a great app called Skyfire, which is good for forecasting colorful sunrises or sunsets. There's lots of technology like that you can have at your disposal that will not guarantee a shot, obviously, but it'll help you along the way just to mitigate against potential disappointment, I guess, that the conditions aren't going to happen the way that you want them to. Cityscapes, I find, are a bit more dependable in that regard. I tend to mainly shoot cities in the blue hour anyway, and blue hours are sort of dependable, you know, whether it's clear or whether it's raining. You know, once the city lights start to come up, I find there's not that much variation in how the city will look from shot to shot, you know, in depending on the weather conditions. So it also just happens to be what I think is the best time of day to shoot a city anyway. So, you know, that much can be controlled. I guess if I'm doing portraits as well, outdoors, it kind of harks back to what you were saying about the studio setup, in that you should really be able to control the light with, you know, off-camera flash or, you know, static lights possibly, rather than rely on atmospheric and weather conditions to do the lighting for you. If you do get some really cool kind of golden side light because the sun is setting, then that's wonderful. But you know, especially when you shoot in this country, you probably shouldn't bank on the weather playing ball. Always have a plan B. Always have a plan B.
Well, the planning thing is really interesting to me. Again, because I'm not a landscape photographer, and I'm not necessarily involved in everything that goes into setting up a shoot. And I know from, like, in particular, working with Dave Williams, for example, how much preparation has to go into a shoot like that. And for instance, you mentioned you prefer to shoot a city in blue hours, so that doesn't give you a whole lot of time. I mean, it gives you an hour and a half, maybe at max, to actually get those shots done. So what does your typical kind of preparation look like?
Good question. So when it relates to travel photography, then when I'm traveling to photograph a city, I would have a very hard time photographing a city here in West Wales. You have a sort of medium-sized town to play with best. So my cityscape shooting is on my travels, and I will typically have a couple of locations scouted out ahead of time, a short list, as it were. You know, these are the potential locations I might go to shoot blue hour, and that would be morning and evening. Wherever possible, I'll head out for both. It works out quite well for me because if I'm traveling with my family, you know, I'll let them have a lie-in the morning, and I'll go out and shoot the blue hour, and then I come back with breakfast, and then everybody's happy. So, and also, you know, it gives me two two cracks at it every day. You know, if I don't get the shot in the morning, then maybe it happens in the evening. Also, an interesting point, when you are shooting cities in the blue hour, the morning blue hour could be very different to the evening blue hour because a lot of the city lights may not be on early morning, you know, billboards and this sort of thing. I've been recording a little bit in London lately, and I wasn't aware that the very famous billboard at Piccadilly Circus, you know, in the very early morning, that is liable to turn off. Not constantly, but you know, for a good couple of minutes when you're hoping to get something interesting. Which I lived in London for 7 years and didn't know that because I wasn't getting up to photograph Piccadilly Circus at that time. But you know, in a lot of cities, you'll find that building lights will turn off, you know, maybe midnight, 1 o'clock, something like that. And if you're trying to get that same look in the morning blue hour, it may not work. And in that case, I use my morning blue hour perhaps for scouting instead. Returning to your original point then about how I would plan it. So I will have a short list of places that I think may work for blue hour. Perhaps I've seen other photographers do something similar at that location. I will do typically some homework ahead of time. My best tip that I have for people is if you really have your heart set on a particular location, it is well worth you checking out Instagram, social media in general, to see what has been captured at that location recently, ideally the previous day or two. The reason I say this is there was a shot that I was desperate to get in Rome of the Roman Forum, and I wanted to get a kind of blue hour, you know, pre-sunrise sort of shot, nice backlighting, that kind of thing. Got up very early, you know, walked halfway across Rome, set up, and in doing so, I realized, as is liable to happen in many places in Italy, it feels like, it was covered in scaffolding. And the shot that I'd woken up for wasn't going to work at all. And by then, blue hour can be quite fleeting, so I didn't have an awful lot of time to go and find my plan B that day. I did have just enough time to leg it to the Colosseum, and I still came away with an acceptable shot for the portfolio, perhaps not one that I had in mind. But if I'd just had my wits about me the night before, I could have just, punched it into Instagram, and I'd see 2,000 selfies going like this, and I'd see in the background that there's scaffolding, and my shot wasn't going to happen the following morning. So these are things that you can teach to other photographers, but it's a mistake I'll occasionally still make. It happens to all of us. But yeah, preparation is key for these kinds of shots. Blue hour in particular, you don't have long to play with. It's 90% planning, 10% execution, if I'm being completely candid with you.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. One of the things that you were talking about this just now is finding the right location to shoot, and especially when you're traveling, that can be a little bit difficult. When you're in a city that you don't know yet, you may have just arrived. You don't really know whether. For most cities, I would say we probably would sort of imagine the main tourist locations like, Rome, the Colosseum, maybe the Vatican, some of the bridges, the Spanish Steps. There's a few sort of typical locations that will come to mind, but, no doubt there's going to be many more interesting locations there. And that's one of the things that I've always found relatively tricky to really get under the skin of that city, so to say, and really, to find out where those really cool locations are. And of course, one tool that's really helpful with that is Photohound. And I knew of Photohound, but I never put two and two together. I never knew that you were the man behind it. Actually, so
well, I mean, I must stress, I'm one of the people behind it. It's not all me. I would hate to steal credit there, but so I'll give you a bit of background on how Photohound came to be. So I work with three other photographers, one of whom is Luka Isenko. Now, he works as a photo tour guide. He lives in Slovenia, so he does photo tours in Slovenia, the Balkans, Italy, lots of different places, quite exotic places now too. But what he was finding was he would post some of his work on his social media, and as is often the case, you'll get 10, 20 people asking, great shot, where's this, and you can only do so much with geotagging on Instagram anyway. You can say what a place is, but it doesn't necessarily say, how to get there, where to park, when to go, practicalities such as, you need to go through this gate to be there for Blue Hour, or whatever the case may be. There's lots of these little things that you might only know if you've done it and been there and done that. And this was sort of a germ of an idea that he had, which was, I'm sick of answering the questions over and over about how to get to these places. Wouldn't it be great if there was a place where photographers could share this information freely, sort of like a Wikipedia for travel photography, or a TripAdvisor, perhaps. Maybe that's a better use case. Like a TripAdvisor for travel photographers, where you can say, this is how to get there. Here's where to park. Here are your viewpoints. Other practical stuff like, is commercial photography allowed here? Is it accessible for people who have limited mobility? Lots and lots of different questions that you could ask about the practicality of getting to a photo spot. We wanted to put all of that into a website or an app that anybody can contribute to, share their photos, and also when they share the photos, the EXIF data comes in with it. So if you've found this awesome image, you're then you're then not asking them, that's an interesting image. Now you've told me all of this stuff about the photo. Can you also tell me how you took it, what settings you took? I guess you could say the goal of this is just to eliminate as many lines of questioning about these photo spots as possible, and just put it all in a central place where you can just say, look, if you want to take a shot like this, here's the information you need, and everything you're going to want is in there. So, proof is in the pudding. I use it myself. I'm visiting Japan in a couple of weeks, and I was very pleased to discover that if I punch in Japan photo spots into Google, Photohound comes up top. I'm using it as research for my forthcoming trip, but also trying to introduce a couple of new spots myself, because one of the things that we're very, very keen on is we want members of Photohound to pay it forward somehow. If you found it useful and you've gone to get images at a certain location, share the images you captured. Tell us what's changed. Is there a farmer that locks a gate at 6 p.m. now, or something like that? That happens a lot in Wales, by the way. I'm always having to update photo spots to say, you can't get to this spot after 6 p.m. because somebody locks a gate. It seems to be a thing. As well as using Photohound, then there are a couple of other ways that I look for potentially interesting photo spots. And of course, when I do achieve those results, I always share everything I've got on Photohound anyway. So to give you some examples then of what I might look for outside of that to find some other things, the obvious one is to look at the tourist board. website. If you're visiting a city, they'll have a tourist bureau, whatever you want to call it. It is their job to entice tourists to come and visit them, and they will have the best imagery of the most interesting places, historic buildings, religious buildings, all of this kind of stuff. But as you rightly mentioned about Rome, these places may be the more tourist friendly, the postcard places, that sort of thing. If you really want to discover some places off the beaten track that perhaps aren't so readily photographed, there's just really no substitute for doing some scouting once you're actually there. It's something I like to devote a day to when I visit a location. I'll arrive with some sort of idea about the main shots that I want to hit or places that I want to hit when I visit. But if I can have a day or half a day just wandering around the city and just getting a lay of the land and seeing what's there, obviously I'm going to big up Photohound as the best thing since sliced bread, but the second best thing since sliced bread is going out to do a bit of scouting and just seeing what fits your tastes as well, because not every photographer will find the same things interesting, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in big cities like London, for example, there's so many different angles that you could take,
oh gosh, yes.
There's so many layers to London, where it just depends on which part of the city you're in. You could go for the Victorian style Jack the Ripper London, and all that, all of that kind of look, the dark alleyways and the brick walls and all that, all that kind of stuff. Or you could go for the super glitzy glass and concrete, super highly modern style and everything in between. There's so many different aspects to it. Which actually brings me
to interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. I was just going to say, it's interesting you should raise London in particular. So in London, last time I checked, we've got something like 250 photo spots, and what I notice is that the variety of those photo spots is quite incredible. Once you get past the first maybe 50 of them, which will be the ones that you will immediately think of, your Tower Bridge, the Shard, etc., Buckingham Palace, there are so many real hidden gems that people are uploading to Photohound that I mentioned earlier. I lived there for 7 years. I didn't know half of these places, and every time I visit too, I'm always finding just new perspectives and interesting little places. Not necessarily the classic postcard stuff either. Like, I enjoy photographing things that tell a story also, or have a bit of history behind it, of which there is no shortage in London. So I think it's quite feasible that in a couple of years you'll be visiting Photohound and there will be, over 1,000 photo spots uploaded, and that there will properly be something for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and especially because a city like London, for instance, and New York City is not necessarily any different. Those cities tend to be changing a lot as well. Mm-hmm. If I just think back when I first moved to London, in the mid '90s, like even if you just look at the skyline of London now, it is a completely different skyline. I mean, when I first moved to London, there were two things that were peeking out of the skyline. One was St. Paul's, and the other one was Canary Wharf. Canary Wharf was the only skyscraper in the entire city of London in those days. And now it's a completely different cityscape. And I find that really interesting. I just like yourself, actually, I lived in London proper for about 6-7 years. Then I moved out of the city and I didn't really go back that much. And now I really enjoy going back because I tend to discover new things all the time. And
also, you're not paying London rent now. That will help enormously.
Yes,
it helps me enormously.
Yeah, it's the only reason I can afford to be a photographer.
Right. Oh, I believe that. Just actually, if I may expand upon a point you just made, that the city is always changing. This was sort of a feature that I needed to build into Photohound not so long ago. Is the ability for people to submit amendments or perhaps update stuff that's listed on some of these photo spots. Because for example, there was I forget the name of it now, but there was a bridge with a very interesting viewpoint towards One Canada Square, the Canary Wharf, the iconic tower in the center of Canary Wharf. And because of all the buildings that have gone up surrounding it, and indeed in the square mile as well, that viewpoint now no longer exists, or rather it's totally different to how it was originally presented. And as such, that spot on Photohound needed to be removed, because the whole point of it was you got this incredible viewpoint that was sort of it was two sides of a road that were leading you very neatly towards One Canada Square. And of course, it's gone now. You've just got the very top of the building peeking out, but the shot that was there before no longer exists. So, and that can happen sometimes with regard to landscape locations too. That there was a location in the American Midwest that we had to remove because sadly it was destroyed in bad weather, things like that. So, of course, this is particularly an issue in cities, though, where things change very, very frequently. London is perhaps our biggest city on Photohound, so we tend to get amendment requests through fairly frequently about spots there. Or indeed, I will go to visit one and I'll find out for myself. I'll think, oh gosh, this used to be great, and now the shot isn't really very good anymore. I should probably update it. So it's interesting you should mention that. I mean, this is what I enjoy about photographing London, though. So my second book was about London, and I finished it with days to spare before the pandemic kicked off. So actually that book never saw the light of day for just over 2 years. But there's so many things that I photographed for that book, which were, I don't want to say unremarkable, but they have become remarkable since. So, for example, I spent a morning photographing the planes arriving at Heathrow Airport. And there's two particular shots that I put in the book that became, subsequent to that, quite interesting if you're a bit of a aviation geek. One of them was a British Airways 747, and I got this shot of it. Just it's as if it's skimming the rooftops coming in over a residential street by Heathrow. But of course, during the pandemic, British Airways retired their entire fleet of 747, so you're not going to see that plane in the sky anymore. And then another shot that I got, it's somewhat in silhouette, so you don't see the logo in great detail, but it's an arrival of a Flybe airplane. And of course, the pandemic is the whole company disappeared, and Flybe is not a thing. Now, I could not possibly have known this at the time, but those were the two images that I selected for the book. And then subsequent to that, I realized, well, gosh, nobody's going to be able to take that shot ever again because those planes aren't flying anymore. And I mean, that's an extreme example, obviously, but the very interesting thing to me about photographing cities is you may find in time that the shots that you take become a bit of a time capsule, even though you don't realize that at the time, and that's not what you're going for in the shot. You find that, oh gosh, this has totally changed. Dubai is another obvious, I guess, example for that. The first time we visited there was in 2016, and I got, some shots that I was pleased with, and, blue hour shots of very tall buildings and, my kind of shot. I love that sort of thing. But even, 2-3 years later, I'm looking at that and going, oh gosh, this shot's kind of obsolete now. There's about 3 more towers. You couldn't even see the Burj Khalifa from this building anymore. So it's, now that you've led me down this path, I realize that I guess that's another thing that I quite enjoy about the cityscape photography is that, you give it long enough, you're going to have to shoot everything all over again.
Yeah. And I always say this, and this is really the thing that fascinates me about British pubs. It's the fact that you find old photographs of the surrounding area on the walls in British pubs very, very regularly. It's one of those features in many, many, many pubs. So you can see the local high street, or or some of the major streets, in photographs that are potentially like 100 years old or older. And I find that extremely fascinating. And of course, a lot has changed since then. We're talking about, you're probably looking at a dirt road rather than, anything that we would recognize as a road nowadays. But some of the buildings would still be there and would still be recognizable. And I find that very fascinating. You often find me in a pub, rather than standing at the bar, I'd be looking at those photographs going, oh, wow, that's now an estate agent. Or that's now a supermarket. Oh, that's a grocery store, something like that. Well, when, I don't know, it's just really something that fascinates me. That's really something that fascinates me about cities, and to a similar degree, when it comes to landscapes as well. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. One of the most fascinating things about the pandemic, really, for me, was always to see those images that were shot in London during the pandemic, of deserted streets and, completely devoid of any human life, no traffic. Those are really historic images, because unless there's another disaster or pandemic or something, I don't think we'll be able to see that again in our lifetime. That's really cool.
Not without some sort of clever Photoshop layering or this kind of stuff.
Yes.
So when I'm doing commercial, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, or like long exposure photography or whatever, maybe. But it's it's just a very, I don't know, I've always found it extremely fascinating. I remember these drone shots of flyovers over London, and you can see all the pigeons in Trafalgar Square. There's no people, no traffic, no buses, none of the stuff that you would expect. And it was just almost like, it also reminded me of that movie. What was it called? 28 Days Later? Was that the one?
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched that just a couple of weeks ago, actually, and yeah, I was getting on my wife's nerves. Just the opening shots where the guy's walking over Westminster Bridge and there's nothing there, and I'm just watching it, going like, what time of day did they do this then? Where is everybody? How did they get permission for this? And then my mind's just turning, going, I wonder if they just let a photographer do that just once. That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Of course they wouldn't, but yeah, no, you raise a good point, and as spectacular and as moving as those pictures were, because of what they represent, you kind of don't want to see them again, obviously. Yeah. But it is. I agree with you. I did find them fascinating. And if you were somebody who was, living in central London at the time, and it was one of those periods when you were allowed to go out to, for your daily jog or whatever it was. I've blocked so much of that out. I can't remember too much of it. But, I'm pretty sure if I lived in central London, I would have my camera around my neck. And I would, if I was tapped on the shoulder by a policeman, I'd have said, oh, no, I'm carrying weight. I'm weight training. This is my workout for the day or something. I'd have my excuses ready.
Yeah. What's your favorite location to photograph generally?
Oh, gosh. Now then. I mean, it sort of depends what genre you're really looking at. I think my immediate thought goes to Singapore, actually, because I tend to gravitate towards cityscape photography, and the best place that I have visited so far, at least, has been Singapore. I just find there's so much to shoot in a relatively small space. You can hop on the metro or whatever, but a lot of this stuff you can kind of do on foot also. So I would I would get up very early and just walk around for hours and hours just taking pictures of all of these incredible glass and steel buildings, like ultra modern architecture, and then within just a few steps you'll have temples, and you'll have Little India and Chinatown and all these kind of places. And I kind of love the juxtaposition between the two as well. I love when you have something that's very, very traditional and perhaps you have a skyscraper looming behind it. I just love those kinds of shots. There are lots of them to choose from in Singapore. And in practical terms as well, as a photographer, you don't feel unsafe walking around very late at night with a very expensive camera around your neck. That can be a consideration in some places. We've spoken at length about London. Sometimes there are places where you may feel a little uneasy walking around with 3 grams worth of camera gear around your neck, and something that says Sony right here on the back of your neck, telling everybody what you're carrying. So you don't really feel that way in Singapore, and also in practical terms, I go there, or everywhere I go really is for the photography. Every holiday is a busman's holiday for me, but visiting Singapore with my family, it's a wonderful city to visit. My son is 7 now, but we visited when he was 3 or 4, I believe, and there's lots of fun stuff for families there as well. And I can't wait to go back, actually.
Fantastic. Singapore really seems like a dream city. I've never been, but it's definitely something that's on my bucket list for sure.
Oh, the food. I forgot to mention the food. 10 on 10, outstanding food everywhere. Even they have these hawker centers, they're called, like a place where there'll be loads of people with stands and stalls doing food, and they'll do like maybe 2 or 3 signature dishes, and you can mix and match. It's very inexpensive relative to Singapore, which is a very expensive city in general. But, the hawker centers doing the street food there are just magnificent. I could eat there 7 days a week.
Dangerous.
I know this is a photography podcast. It's nothing to do with food. I had to just shoehorn that in there. I loved it.
That's why I like talking about food photography on this podcast, of course. In which case you can talk about food all day long. It's brilliant.
That's one thing I couldn't do. I couldn't be a food photographer because it wouldn't last long around me. That would be just I could get a picture of an empty plate with crumbs on it. That's more my style.
Well, that's a style within itself. Let's talk about the the post-processing, the editing side of landscape photography as well, because that's the other thing that's always absolutely fascinated me. I'm known to replace a sky or two when it comes to shots like that, but I mentioned Skylum earlier. Give us an overview over what you do for Skylum, because incidentally that's how we met originally.
It is, yes. Just to recap for everybody watching, I work with Skylum as an ambassador. So, the proof is in the pudding. I use this software every day, and I did long before I became an ambassador for them. I as many of us do, we publish our images on social media and tag people and companies who might be interested in what you do, the camera manufacturer and the tripod manufacturer and all of that sort of thing. And I would also tag, Adobe for Lightroom and Skylum for Luminar. And obviously I did that to such an extent that somebody in their office took notice and very kindly invited me to, become an ambassador to not necessarily promote their product, but more to just educate people on how to use it. Because relative to some of the competitors in the industry, I mean, Adobe especially, they're a giant company with, the resources to have their own in-house people to do workshops and education and this kind of thing. And everybody's doing tutorials on YouTube. But, part of my remit with Skylum was to make educational material to help people edit their photos better. Not necessarily edit it exactly how I would do, but to just give people the knowledge and the understanding about what the tools do and how it will benefit them, and just give them some use cases of how I would edit my images. So I should clarify as well that Luminar Neo is their flagship product, and it is available as a standalone image editor, or you can use it as a plugin for Lightroom and Photoshop. So many of us photographers, we'll have our catalog set up in Lightroom. Let's say I have a catalog in Lightroom. I still use it, and I will typically export my images to Luminar Neo for editing. So I sort of have my cataloging and my editing kind of separated. But if I was doing, batch editing, let's say I've done a wedding and I've got, a couple of hundred images to edit, then obviously I'm not going to export those one by one into Luminar Neo. I would probably just import the whole folder and then edit them all in there, using their catalog facility. But for individual edits, for portraits, individual portraits, I should say, and portfolio type work, then typically I will, just export the single image and take it forward using Luminar Neo. At the moment, I am working on a video course talking about travel photography and also how I edit the pictures afterwards using Luminar Neo. So I would love to tell you it'll be on sale by the time this podcast is live, but I'm not sure that it will be, but it'll be very, very soon, I'm sure. Now, if any of your viewers are already members of Luminar Membership, which is their monthly subscription service where you get assets like skies, templates, this kind of thing, then you will get this course for free, effectively. It will unlock for you there. Otherwise, it'll be available for purchase on their marketplace. And in doing this video course, I mean, first of all, it's kind of my first time appearing properly in front of the camera, so it's been a big learning experience for me. But also recording myself editing and explaining to the viewers watching bit by bit everything that I'm doing. It was an eye-opener even to me in terms of the stuff that I've always kind of done in my edits and never really given it a second thought. And when you have to explain, step by step, I'm using this tool now and this is why I'm doing it. I found myself a couple of occasions going, gosh, why am I actually using this? What am I? And you just realize actually, oh, I have a signature look and I've never really thought about, I've never really thought too much about that. So I found myself at times having to double back and say, well, look, you don't have to do it this way. This is just my editing style, I've realized. And when it comes to editing, I guess there's, it's art, isn't it? So there's no real right or wrong answer. It's just whatever vision you want to realize. I guess my challenge in preparing this video and educating people is stuff like you said about the sky replacement, right? I know I just said art is art and there's no right or wrong answer, but with sky replacement, yes, there is a right or a wrong answer. You can, sky replacements can be done in such a way that they look complementary to a scene. And there are times when it could look like a sky replacement and it doesn't match the scene at all. And, little things like that where you just impart some tips about how to match things convincingly. And actually, one thing I'd be interested to get your opinion on is sort of the ethics of doing this, because I do a lot of Camera Club talks, for example, and when I reach the part about AI tools and sky replacement and this kind of stuff, I always get a little bit of pushback on that because there is, I want to say a little bit of controversy, I guess, about, what is the ethics of replacing a sky? Is it acceptable if it's your own sky? Is it acceptable if you took one picture and then you turned 90 degrees and took a sky and you composited them together? Is that acceptable because it was done at the same time? What happens then if you purchase a pack of skies from Skylar Marketplace, do you start to use those? Is that, I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer to that either. I'm going to throw this back to you now. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. What are your thoughts on how we use these tools?
It's like you said, there's a lot of controversy, and I think my wife calls it the fluffy bit when there's a new tool that arrives on the scene. First of all, everybody's arguing about it. There's lots of controversy, and then years down the line, it just becomes normalized. And I think the same thing is true with Photoshop or digital post-processing in the first place. I'm pretty sure when that first happened back in the late 90s or something, there was a lot of controversy around that. Is that right that to edit your photo on a computer, blah blah blah, in comparison to how it used to be done in the darkroom. But now we're 24, 25, 26 years later, nobody even blinks, twice when you mention Photoshop. But I think the same thing is probably going to happen. I mean, I've come across those discussions in camera clubs as well. For instance, the idea that that composites are fine as long as each component has been shot by the photographer rather than importing things from other sources, sort of thing. The sky replacements are a really good example. Did you shoot the sky yourself, or is it a sky that But of course, the reality is, even Photoshop comes with a number of built-in sky options. So
correct.
Which I tend to see all the time, weirdly, because you tend to recognize them after a while. Especially if people don't change them in any way. But yeah, it's one of these things. I mean, AI tools is the same thing. Like, for instance, then you can really get into the nitty gritty detail of it. Like, when you use an AI tool, well, is it okay to use generative fill? And if that's not okay, what about some AI generative healing tool, for example? And really, what's the difference between me spending 30 minutes trying to use the stamp tool to get the exact same effect, or literally a split second using a new AI tool? I mean, the end result is the same. So my personal view, this is really just my personal view. I know lots of listeners will disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. Like, this isn't the U.S. election.
No,
different opinions, all right?
Good Lord, let's not talk about politics. Good God,
exactly.
Cancelled.
But my personal opinion is, I'm, in a sense, interested in the end product. Personally, it's the reflection of the artist's creative eye. That's what I'm personally interested in, and I couldn't care less whether that sky was shot by the photographer or not. It's really because the creativity, the artistry, in my view, is about pulling all of these elements together and creating that end product. And I say that because, generally speaking, I always say, like, I'm more interested in the process. And actually, that's true from a creator's point of view. I love the process. I actually love the whole thing of, like, I love the post-processing part because to me, it's like, it's part of the same thing. There's the shooting stage, as I call it, and then there's the editing stage. And to me, those two things go hand in hand. So I'm like a million light years away from got to get it right in camera type of thing, and I always caveat that with, I also, when I go to a shoot, I also need to get it right in camera, but I need to get it right for the edit because I already know what the post-processing part looks like. I need to get the shot right so it works with what I've got in mind afterwards, if that makes sense, And so I personally, I think these tools are new. People need to get used to them. My experience with camera clubs is of course, that, generally your audience in camera clubs are people that have sometimes have been involved in photography for decades, and so there's this sort of there's a certain sluggishness of accepting change. It just takes longer for that to happen. I think it's when people see the possibilities, of the things that you can create with those tools. That's ultimately what's going to change people's minds. But I know my own camera club. I'm a member of a local camera club in the next town where I live, and these discussions have been going on all the time. Some people agree, some people disagree. I'm always more on the sort of forward-looking side. I was like, yeah, give me all the tools. The more tools, the better.
Agreed.
But and also that's the other thing is, it's I'm saying this, we're talking about camera clubs, but if you look at it from a commercial point of view, I'm also a commercial photographer, so I need to think about it from a business point of view. And the reality is, and I always say this because it's absolutely true, when I'm behind the camera, I'm making money. When I'm editing, I'm losing money. The less time I can spend in front of my computer, the better, because I can go out and shoot. And so purely from a commercial perspective, any tool that somebody gives me that means that I can save time is worth the money. For people who do like individual headshots, it might not necessarily make that much of a difference. But I'll tell you this, like when you shoot things like weddings, for example, weddings is a good example. I don't shoot weddings, but it's a similar thing. I shoot sports events sometimes, and I come home, or concerts, and I come home with thousands of images. If there's a tool that saves me only like 5 seconds or something on each shot, if I've got to edit 2,000 shots, these 5 seconds per image very quickly add up to a massive amount of time. And then you're talking...
No-brainer.
It's an absolute no-brainer. So my view is, if there's a tool that saves me time, that gives me better results, or even the same results, but it just saves me a ton of time, I am all in, and then, of course, once you go past the purely practical, then I don't know. I think anybody, personally, I imagine anybody who's thinking creatively will immediately think like, well, if I can use this tool to save me time, what else could I use it for? Like, how could I use this in a creative way? That's the thing. Sky replay. You come back to sky replacements. Like, yeah, you can replace the sky. I don't know if you're like a property photographer or something. You need to replace the sky because we're in the UK and blue skies are hard to come by. Well, this is the thing.
It's my most common use case actually for sky replacement is commercial photography. I've got one shot at it. I can't. Perhaps I've had to drive 90 minutes to get to a place, and I'm not going to do it twice. So if it's an overcast day, nail the shot, get the best lighting you possibly can, and match a sky to it. Now, obviously, don't go crazy with it and put in, a luminous pink sunset when it was an overcast day. It's not going to look right. Likewise, Luminar Neo ships with a couple of built-in skies, one of which is a Milky Way sky with a very distinctive meteor going through the middle of it. I see that sky, no word of a lie, about 20 times a week. It's just not going to work, is it? But if you're sensible with your sky replacements, if you don't, if you take that grey sky and you replace it with something that is, perhaps you've got fluffy white clouds and a bit of blue breaking through, it's just overall a lot more appealing, but also doesn't look out of place either. You can get away with it. So for me, that's the biggest use case for sky replacement.
And the thing is, like, I always think, like, that there's never, like, it's not a world of black and white either. Like, there's so many, like, yes, there are amazing tools in Photoshop and things like Luminar, which I haven't actually tried yet, so I need to get into that. But just because there are, whole sets of skies that you can get, it doesn't mean that if you've got an amazing sky happening outside, if there's a sky happening outside and it looks amazing, I'm the first one out there with the camera. I'll shoot that thing, and it'll go into my own little, file of skies that I sometimes pull out, because sometimes that's just exactly what I need. whether it's the direction, the angle, the type of clouds, the lighting, whatever it may be. I might just have a shot where I go like, oh yeah, I remember that's kind of a shot 6 months ago. That would be perfect for this. And then, it's yet another tool in your toolbox. And I think that's always, that's the thing. The property thing is actually, it's interesting because I remember when Cara, my youngest daughter, when she was like, maybe 7 or 8 or something, we were in our local high street, and I was looking at an estate agent's, and in the UK they have these pictures in the shop window, of different properties that are for sale. And I remember we were looking at these properties, way too expensive for us to afford, but it was fun to look at. And then at some point, my daughter was like, "Oh, I think all of these houses were photographed on the same day." And she goes, "Look, it's exactly the same sky." And I'm like, "Oh yeah," and so it is.
It's a common thing. Do you know what though? I think my main bugbear with sky replacements, or just generative AI in general, is I'm kind of a live and let live sort of guy. If you like using these tools, absolutely cool. What I disagree fundamentally with is either, outright lying about the circumstances by which a photographer came to take the picture,
Sure.
And they always get caught out, always get caught out. To give you a recent example, and this is probably what made me feel this strongly about this. So I don't know if you had the chance to see it yourself, but on May the 10th of 2024, we experienced what was reportedly the strongest display of the Northern Lights in 20 years.
Yes.
I'd been out all night. I came home at dawn, and I'd been prepared for it. I knew exactly where I was going to go, and
because I saw your images. I saw your images on Facebook, and that's exactly what I thought. I was like, he's been thinking about this.
Oh, I knew. I had a map, I had a route, I knew exactly where I'd be, and hit all the spots, and did what I needed to do. But of course, in the days that followed, lots of photographers were sharing their images of that night, and they were incredible. And then there were one or two who will remain nameless, but there were a couple of examples where I think it was just a case of a photographer who wanted to just get in on that action because it was trending on Twitter or whatever, and would post a picture that was very clearly a composite or a sky replacement of just a generic Northern Light sky with a location in the dark, and of course got caught out big time because it's just this formation of aurora borealis just didn't fit with anything anyone else happened to see that night in that part of the country, and indeed the person I'm thinking of sort of had form for this also, and If somebody was to post that with the caption that, gosh, I was so inspired by what I saw the other night that I decided to put together this artwork of this shot that I took of the night sky with the aurora above it, this is how it would look. You'd have a lot more respect for that. And as somebody who does a lot of digital editing, that it's not a negligible amount of work to do that either. But what I fundamentally disagree with is, dishonesty or dishonesty by omission, where you just say, "Oh, hey, just snapped this picture last night." No, you didn't. You got the foreground last night and you put something in after it. As long as people are upfront about their methods, then I've got no real problem with anything really.
That's probably like 95% of Instagram. Where people are like, I just leisurely, I just snapped this little snapshot, and you're like, yeah, right. That's like studio lights in there, and these people are not normal people; they're models.
Yeah, just casually having my breakfast, and they're in a pool in Bali, and it's like, come on. Exactly. You got your breakfast on this floating little heart-shaped bamboo something or other.
yeah.
No, come on.
Yeah, or
You had
a
a pro took that picture. It's
yeah,
fine.
or even just the breakfast itself. I just casually threw this together this morning. Took me 20 seconds. And you're like, yeah, right. Okay, well, that's like, perfectly manicured plate. Oh, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
But, I absolutely agree with you on that when it comes to the honesty aspect. And, of course, that's one of the major, I think, conundrums that camera clubs face as well, because like, how do you prove that all of the elements in this photograph were actually shot by the photographer or not, and so in my head I always think there's a really simple solution to that, because basically we already have, when it comes to camera club competitions, we already have different categories, and these categories come with very specific rules, like for instance wildlife and nature. You're not really allowed to do any extensive editing, or compositing in that particular category, because you're actually showcasing wildlife and nature as it is. But there are other categories where you can use, photoshopping, as they call it, and you can do pretty much whatever you want. So just to have almost like an AI, maybe a creative category, where you can just be as creative as you want, because that sort of, in a sense, already exists for like crazy, I don't know, mosaic, weird Photoshop creations that people like. I think it's called, I can't remember what the exact category is called. But, so in my view, it doesn't necessarily make that much of a difference. There are certain categories where you basically say, okay, well, here are the rules. If you want to compete in this category, or you want to enter your shots in this category, then these are the rules, and you could have to abide by those rules, or otherwise your entry is void. What here is, if you do want to, I don't know, Photoshop a goose in front of, or a duck in front of the fox that you've just shot, then by all means do that. But you just can't compete in the wildlife category with that. It'll just have to be in the whatever creative category or whatever. I mean, that's kind of that's always how I look at it. It's I find that, it's funny you mentioned pushback earlier. I find that sometimes when I do camera club talks about in particular about this of 3 heads in a row type of shoot that I do. This is a particular portrait style, and that particular shot is really, I would say, half is in the actual shooting stage, and the other half is actually in creating the look in post-processing. And I always, the way I sort of compare it always is that I say, like, well, it's a little bit like, having an electric guitar and an amplifier. If for all us guitarists, like, we know that if you play an electric guitar and it's not plugged in, it doesn't actually make very much sound. It's very quiet, it's very twangy. There's not much to it. And an amplifier on its own is just an inanimate object that doesn't make any sound on its own. But when you plug the two, when you connect the two, you plug the guitar into the amp, that's when the music starts to happen.
With you.
And it's exactly the same thing with a lot of photography. Is that you have to look at it as 2 separate stages that will really only create the end product when you put them together. And this is why, I said earlier, I often think like, well, I shoot for the edit because I already know how I'm going to post-process it. That's why there are certain elements that have to be right in camera when I'm doing that, because I already know the second stage is going to follow, so to say, in order to create the end product. If that makes any sense. But so it's but it all comes down to legitimacy and honesty, and just being open about how you created that particular image. I think throughout history, there have obviously always been cases where people have tried to pass things off for something they're not. I'm thinking, the Loch Ness monster, for instance.
Yes.
What was that? What was it? A tire or something? Whatever the thing that
I
was.
believe so. Yeah. like a piece of rubber on a stick or something. I don't know.
Yes, exactly. There's a fantastic video on the Platypod YouTube channel about photo hoaxes, actually, which kind of dives into all these sort of things. But yeah, I mean, it's always been around. It's never going to change. And actually, yeah, I think I'm with my wife, which she calls it the fluffy bit that we just have to get through, and then we'll come out of the other side. What makes Skylum different from, or Lumina Neo different from, let's say, Photoshop? What are the main differences?
Good question. And actually, I would say this is probably one of the most asked things when I'm doing a trade show for Skylum. And what I try to explain to people is, you can do anything with Photoshop, right? That's the beauty of it. It's just this all encapsulating, all in one thing, and you can achieve almost any visual result using Photoshop. But the learning curve is very steep, and for anybody who is just getting started with that kind of stuff, it's very intimidating. Also, though, if you want to do it in any great volume, it's quite a lot of work to do the same. So, I mean, I know you can have like Photoshop actions and this kind of stuff, but if you were going to do, let's say, and I'm chuckling to myself at the very thought here. If you wanted to edit a whole wedding, let's say, using just Photoshop, oh boy, you're in for a long week or something. It's not to put down what Photoshop does, because Photoshop can do anything and do it brilliantly as long as you are in control of it and know what you're doing. What Luminar Neo does is it takes so many of the most common use cases for Photoshop, and it makes it very, very accessible to people. It makes it'll turn things into slider form or toggles and this kind of stuff. For example, if you're doing a portrait and you want to, let's just say I'm doing a couple of wedding shots and I want to process them all the same way, and I want to, apply an Orton effect, let's say. You can, of course, do that in Photoshop, and you could probably, spend a few minutes and create an action to do it all for you. With Luminar Neo, though, it's two sliders. That's it, just two sliders adjusted to taste. And then if you've got 200 images that you want to edit the same way, it's just you click on all of them, you sync the adjustments, and it'll just apply the same thing across all of them. So for me, it's primarily about saving time. I don't feel at this stage of my career that there's any look that I could only achieve in Luminar Neo and not achieve in Photoshop, because like I said, Photoshop does everything. But the time it would take me, or most people, in Photoshop becomes challenging to deal with, particularly when you're dealing with multiple images, or let's say you've got a whole set to go through. So for me, it's primarily a time-saving tool. It's a particular use for me now that I do weddings. So I haven't touched upon this already, but I have a business partner. Her name's Kelly Dixon, and we both shoot weddings together. We had a brainstorming session, and we came up with the really imaginative title of Browne and Dixon Photography. Not going to win any awards for originality there, but that's what we call ourselves. And so she is a very talented wedding photographer. She specializes particularly in the kind of candid shots. Like I mentioned earlier, like sometimes the candid shots are the best when you just capture those little moments of a day. But where she was really struggling was with the editing side of stuff. And she was doing it with, Lightroom for cataloging, and the advanced stuff she would import very painfully one by one into Photoshop. And it fate would have it that we would become introduced, and I would say, well, look, I happen to work as an ambassador for this company, and they do some photo editing software. You should check it out. And of course, she loved it, and Long story short, we decided to go into business together and shoot weddings. So sometimes it'll be the case that she will be out shooting the weddings and then she can send me to edit. Sometimes it's vice versa. It allows us to share our presets and settings also. So we have between us a signature look, or looks, I should say, that we use in all of our work. And it doesn't really matter which one of us shot the wedding, so long as, everything's in focus and everything looks a certain way, then, it's fairly trivial for us to apply our looks to the whole wedding set. So it's such a big time-saving tool for me as a professional. And when I'm doing these camera club talks, I find that a lot of camera club members who are perhaps a little reticent to use editing software in general, perhaps they're intimidated by it, they find that Luminar Neo is quite accessible. The user interface, it's kind of fun and it's friendly and it's not very intimidating. It's a couple of sliders and you mess about with a few, and before you know it, you've done a quite advanced edit to a picture. More often than not, when I'm demonstrating this to people like this, they're completely blown away and they end up downloading the free trial and this kind of thing. So for two ends of the market then, the really entry level, they love it because it's easy to use. And then at the kind of more advanced level of the market, like myself, it's time saving. And that's like you said, time is money when it comes to editing. I love how you framed that. When you're editing, you're losing money. That's so true. And this is what Luminar Neo does for me.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it is. It's the volume edits. It's such a huge time drag. Usually, weddings are a really good example. I shoot a lot of boxing events, throughout the year, and again, it's there's no. It's the same look. There are commercial reasons as to why it's the same look, but also it's because, of course, it's the same event. But if you think about it, a lot of these events, I'm talking about probably anywhere between 20 and 30 fights a night. The other day I shot 35 in one night, which is an absolute killer. But you come away with thousands of images. They have to be edited to a certain point because they then are available for print and all the rest of it. I get paid for the event, so if I spend 5 days editing those, I'm not going to get paid anymore.
No, nobody sees the editing.
Nobody sees the editing, exactly. So it's if I can get the same thing done in a matter of hours rather than days, then of course it opens me up to do all sorts of other things throughout the rest of the week. At the moment I've got a workflow. I think for the time being, I think I've made the workflow as efficient as I can, but that's been for the last year or so. That's been the main thing. I've just been working on the workflow. How can I eliminate even just down to a few keystrokes? Because again, this, like I said earlier, over the course of 2,000 images, that very quickly those 2 keystrokes now turn into 4,000 keystrokes. And then the time saving becomes real. And
yes.
And so it's it's super, super important.
Absolutely. And speaking about the wedding thing as well, what I'm realizing very quickly is you have to be so selective on the wedding shoot about when you use burst mode, right? So I will typically use it for the confetti shot. That'll be one. Tossing the bouquet would be the other. And depending how good the lighting is, perhaps the first kiss also, although you do sometimes have the luxury of getting to stage that afterwards if you didn't quite have the right angle or the vicar doesn't let you stand in the right spot or something like that. But as long as you limit your use of burst mode throughout the day, you should be all right. There is a temptation when you're shooting candids, like if you're a second shooter and you're just mingling and you're doing the candid shots. It is tempting, particularly if there's kids running about or something, and you want to get the magic shot when they're just isolated against the backdrop or something like that. It is tempting to just chuck it into burst then, but you won't be thanking yourself later when you've got an extra 400 or 500 images to sift through.
yeah, it's unbelievable the difference that makes. I mean, again, in boxing, for example, instinctively you would go like, yeah, I'm going to burst mode the sucker all the way through, because that's how you get these, because you always want the perfect shot of like when the glove connects with the face, you want some sweat, like some pearls of sweat flying off in the air, ideally backlit, so you want to have the facial expression and all of that. It's needs to be super sharp and all the rest of it. That's your ideal shot. And of course, yeah, your chances are higher if you go through like high speed burst mode with all of that. No doubt. But you're going to be editing 10 times as many images. Well, at least you're going to be sifting through them. And this is like the culling part of it in itself takes absolutely forever, because it's a major difference if I have to go through 1,000 images compared to 5,000 images. It's a major time suck, Do
you find that perhaps you could become a pretty decent boxing coach now, because you've sort of learned when the shots are coming? you could be in somebody's corner going, watch the left.
I think it's always the case, the better you get to know a particular sport. Now, I really have no history in boxing. I don't know anything about boxing other than trying out at the gym or something. I've never boxed before. I don't know any of now I think I know the technical terms, but I never knew what an uppercut was before. What the heck is that? But now I know all these terms because I've got coaches on both sides of the ring shouting at the boxers in the ring like non-stop. I get bombarded with it all the time. But you start to be able to predict what's going to happen. So and that really it sort of translates into when you hit the shutter button, because your instinct would be you see the glove coming. And if you wanted to get that connection between the glove and the face, your instinct would be to wait until they connect and then hit the button. But you're always going to be late at that point. You're always going to be late. You're going to have to train yourself to basically preempt that. So you get yourself to the point where, you try and react before it actually happens. And then if you take all of those different delays into account, the delays between, like, I don't know, the neurons in your brain firing to your muscles actually pressing the button, then the electronic signal to actually activate the shutter, then the shutter to expose the image, then the image to be saved and all that kind of stuff. There are just milliseconds that go by for all of that to happen. So you sort of need to train yourself to be ahead of time a little bit, if that makes sense. And that takes a little bit of practice.
Well, I spoke to another sports photographer not so long ago, and not being a sports photographer myself, I hadn't quite realized how mentally taxing a night like that is going to be for you shooting the boxing, because you have to be really, really focused, don't you? For what? How many hours are you there? 3-4 hours, something like that?
No, it's the shoot that I did last weekend was 8 hours.
Oh my word!
35 fights, yeah. And the problem is, the problem is that you have no breaks. It's full on, and it's fast because they have to get through all of these fights, because often there's a hard stop on the venue, so they have to be finished at a certain time. There's no, they can't just run over, because then there's an ambulance crew there. Everybody has to get paid. All of a sudden, the whole thing gets way too expensive. So if there's a hard stop at, let's say, midnight, then that is it. Everybody has to be out at midnight. So it's you're super focused for the whole time. But also after each fight, they announce the winner. I've got to shoot the winner jumping in the air image. And then there's another image afterwards where they shake hands, they hold up their trophy. I got to get that shot. So whilst they're then leaving the ring, they're already announcing the next lot, for my tannoy. So, but I still have to then move around the ring and put my SD card into a remote SD card reader to download those images, because they then immediately go to the printing station, the guys who create like photo frames and all that kind of stuff. So then that has to happen. In the meantime, I have to load a second SD card and then run around to where the next lot of fighters come in so I can get the entrance shot. So you really never get it. There's no break. There's no letdown. And one thing I've learned from the ambulance crew, because I've noticed that the ambulance crew have a table with all that oxygen shit and all the rest, all the other stuff that they got in there. But they always have Haribos on there, like packets of Haribos. And I always thought, like, this is weird. Is this some weird trend among ambulance people? Is that they eat Haribo candy all the time? But it turns out they do it because it gives you very quick sugar energy. So because they need to be on it, they need to watch everything that goes on in the ring, because they need to be on it. If something goes wrong or somebody starts to show signs of injury or something, they need to be on it. So they really can't, they have to keep their eyes on the fighters all the time. So they basically power themselves up by eating Haribos, to give them a quick burst of energy. And so that's one strategy I've adopted, is that I always have 10 Fastics with me.
I may have to. I may need to take them with me to the next wedding I do. That's a good tip.
What do you think is in your view, what are the most commonly made mistakes when people edit or retouch landscape images?
Oh, I know this immediately, because it's something that I will still do, and all of us, I think, whether we admit it or not, we'll still do from time to time, and that is we will just simply overcook our edits. I advise, if it's a portfolio piece, when you think you have finished editing, go and get a cup of tea and come back with fresh eyes, because very often you will sit back down and you will look at your edit and you'll think, gosh, I need sunglasses on to look at this picture. What have I done? So you do need to reset, because when you introduce very strong saturation, for example, your eyes just adjust to it and kind of compensate a little bit. Or at least I find this happens to me regularly. So there are often times when I will just revisit an image and think, like it, but maybe a couple of sliders can come down just a touch. And it's, fundamentally the edit might have been sound. It's just that perhaps a couple of sliders were a few notches above where they ought to be. And, if photographers just remember that last step and just take that step back and have a look at things with fresh eyes, then that will overcome a lot of this. And it is subjective as well. Some photographers really love that kind of hyper saturated look, and then some go the other direction where they want everything to look very muted and looks like it belongs in a kind of Scandinavian crime drama. It's all a matter of taste. But for me, I love my images to be vibrant. I love a pop of color in the image. It's just you've got to be a little sparing with what you do.
Do you find there like trends in the way that landscape images are edited?
Yeah, I think I name checked one when I was talking about the the Scandinavian what was it, the Scandinavian crime dramas. You do get trends, and Instagram tends to lead many of those. That there will be a handful of photographers who will be your kind of 100, 200,000 follower count people who will have a very fixed and rigid way of editing their work that other people then will they'll appreciate their work and emulate it themselves, and then that sort of becomes a trend, as it were. There's nothing wrong with that. If you like somebody's style and you think it works, it complements what you're doing behind the camera, there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to be wary of following a trend because you think editing that way is going to be the secret formula for getting social media success and attention and something like that. If you're not editing your images in a way that is authentic to you and authentic to your style, I think people in time will sort of see through that a little bit. And a lot of photographers will preach about having their signature style. I mentioned it earlier with the wedding photography. I mean, what is a signature style really? I mean, these things can often be, not necessarily replicated, but you can see what people are doing. Perhaps it's, a bit of desaturation, bit of fade, job done sort of thing. So, worry about editing in a way that you like first, and you will find your people. This was very, very true when we started the wedding photography venture, because you will find that there are just, particularly at the higher end, there will be photographers who will edit their images in a very, very strict, rigid way, and every single image is going to conform to, one of a handful of different looks in their entire portfolio. And you're not on the path to success if you, as a wedding photographer, look at somebody else and go, right, I'm going to edit exactly like this person. Because if somebody is looking for that kind of style, well, they're going to hire the other guy, aren't they? So, worry about finding your own look, finding your own voice as a photographer, and then in time, your clients, your audience, they will find you too.
Incredible. Perfect advice. Mathew, thank you so much for being the guest on the Camera Shake podcast this week. It was absolutely enlightening conversation. Where can people find your course and your books, for example?
Good question. So, the best place to find everything really that I do is on my website, which is www.mathewbrowne.co.uk. That is one T in Matthew and E at the end of Brown. I spell it very awkwardly, or rather my parents decided to spell it awkwardly for me. But it works out great for me because nobody else spells it that way. So all of the social media names, they're always free, so I can claim those. It's great. So if you punch my name in most places, Insta, YouTube, all of that, you will find me. I should say I've just started a YouTube channel. Some people have a New Year's resolution. That was my turning 40 resolution is, stop being so chicken and get on YouTube finally and show people what you got. Admittedly, by the time you watch this, I think I've only got the one video on there, but I have a few videos in various states of editing ready to go up. And with regard to the video course, then that will be linked through from my website. But if you are a customer already of Skylum, you will no doubt be getting a mailer about it in a couple of weeks. And of course, if you are traveling anywhere and taking images and finding photo spots, we would love to see you at Photohound, which is www.photohound.co. And there is also an app on iOS and Android. It's free to sign up, free to contribute. So if you've been on your travels, you've seen something really cool, share it with the world, and other photographers can find it, and hopefully, you will get a bit of inspiration for your next travel adventure as well.
Okay, folks, that is it for today. It was awesome having Mathew on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Check out episode 208 with Pics Imperfects, Ambesh Dinder. I'm sure you love it. And if you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening on the audio version of this podcast, Did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guests' photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should by now because I harp on about that all the time. All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. Thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday, so make sure you mark that in your calendars. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.